It's not strippers. Were you asking her to say a couple? We're asking her.
Okay, we're going to get started here in about 1 minute. Get settled in. Lori, is it just when we say go, you're ready? Is the online thing online? Okay. Get the door, please. Yeah, we'll start with the video. Okay, is everybody ready? Okay, let's go, Lori.
Welcome, everyone. I hereby call the meeting to order. I'm Ken Weinstein, Chairman of the Broadcasting Board of Governors. This is an open meeting of the U.S. Agency for Global Media's Board of Governors being held in compliance with the government in the Sunshine Act. A digital recording of this meeting will be available for online viewing on the agency's new website, www.usagm.gov. Joining me today are Governors Aaron Kempner Kornblue and Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs Michelle Guida. On February 5th, Secretary of State Pompeo delegated to Ms. Guida the authorities of the Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. Just thought I'd say a few words about Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs Guida. She was sworn in on February 3rd, 2018. She brings a wealth of global strategic communications experience to the department from a distinguished career in the private sector. Among numerous honors she's held, in 2016 she was honored with the Outstanding 50 Asian Americans in Business Award by the Asian American Business Development Center, and all of us are really looking forward to working with you. Thank you. If you'd care to say a few words.
Sure. Thank you. It's my honor to be here today. I've really been looking forward to participating and meeting everybody here. As Kenneth said, I've been with the State Department now for 1 year and in the Undersecretary role for 1 month. So I think there's a lot of great opportunity to learn more about USAGM. I've met with John several times to learn about the global networks that USAGM is putting together, focusing on language versus markets, and especially on the analytics and data front. So excited to be a part of the conversation and to be here. Thank you.
Welcome.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, we're all looking forward to working with you. And now I want to take a few moments to do as we always do, to recognize the challenges and sacrifices our journalists make every day to report the truth. Threats to our journalists continue at alarming rates, and we have a video telling a few of the stories. Before we get to that, however, I want to express on behalf of the board our condolences to the Al-Hura family on the death of Al-Hura, Iraq assistant videographer Samir Ali Shakara. Samir was just 29 when he was killed in Baghdad on January 9th after an apparent carjacking that turned fatal. He had been working with Al-Hura Iraq since February 2017, although his murder does not appear to have been politically motivated. His absence is deeply felt by his colleagues and those who have come to rely upon his work. While he may not have been targeted as a member of the media, of the press, his death reminds us of the dangerous situations and environments in which our journalists work. His photo is right there, handsome young man, no longer with us. Here are some of the cases that we are following.
Every day, journalists for the networks of the United States Agency for Global Media risk harassment, physical harm, and imprisonment simply to do their jobs. In recent months, journalists from Vietnam to Venezuela and Uzbekistan to Ukraine have felt increasing pressure. Popular blogger and RFA contributor Trong Duy Nhat has been missing for more than 3 weeks since he fled his home in Da Nang, Vietnam, for neighboring Thailand to seek asylum. It is feared that Mr. Nhat was abducted and taken back to Vietnam for imprisonment and interrogation. Also in Vietnam, RFA contributor Nguyen Van Hoa remains imprisoned, serving a 7-year sentence after daring to report on protests following a toxic waste spill in 2016. He has been repeatedly beaten in detention and forced to make a false confession, which Vietnamese authorities used to convict an environmental activist. Since the outbreak of demonstrations in Sudan and the extensive coverage that MBN has given the events, the Sudanese authorities have been obstructing the work of Al Hurra reporter Abdelbaki Alawad Aldal Mohammed. After a 2-week delay, he was finally granted journalist accreditation. However, the Sudanese government has retracted those credentials without explanation. Russian officials have launched a retaliatory criminal investigation into Radio Svoboda contributor Svetlana Prokopieva in a clear attempt to silence the journalist. She faces up to 7 years in prison on charges of justifying terrorism. RFERL Ukrainian service freelancer Stanislav Asayev continues to be held incommunicado by Russia-backed separatists in eastern Ukraine's so-called Donetsk People's Republic. Asayev disappeared in June 2017 and was last seen publicly in a highly questionable video confession that aired on Russian state TV in August of 2018. In Venezuela, a VOA Spanish reporter was followed to her room by Venezuelan paramilitary police after she spent some time reporting from Caracas. The owner of the hotel, as well as guests, stopped the police from entering the premises. That journalist is now taking necessary precautions to remain safe. On February 5th, the car of a VOA Kurdish stringer was set on fire outside of his home. Authorities discovered evidence of arson and are investigating. Elsewhere, another VOA Kurdish stringer has been charged with promoting terror in retaliation for reports done in 2014 and 15. The stringer's court date has not yet been set. Pressure on RFERL's Pashto language operations in Pakistan have intensified since the forced closure of its Islamabad bureau last year. For the past 6 months, Radio Mashal's website has been blocked throughout the country. RFERL freelancers have also faced significantly increased pressure in the past 2 months from Pakistani intelligence agencies. In Uzbekistan, RFERL correspondents continue to be harassed. A home owned by RFERL Uzbek service journalist Shukrat Babajinov was seized in August by a court in Uzbekistan. Babajinov claims the seizure is an act of political retribution motivated by his work for RFERL, and that it follows a pattern of other actions by the government against him and his family. For more information on these and other threats to our journalists, please visit usagm.gov.
Yeah, I know all of us in the USAGM community are heartbroken to see the way that our colleagues are being treated by various governments around the world. And it reminds us just of the importance of the work that they are doing and the importance of the work that all of us do here at the agency on a daily basis. Now let's turn to board business. The presence of 5 or more governors satisfies the board's quorum requirement. A quorum being present, the board may conduct business on majority vote. On February 22nd, the board received via email materials for the consent agenda, which allowed sufficient time for all governors to review the agenda prior to the meetings. Now, we did not hear any comments from any governors, and the consent agenda is at tabs 1, 2, and 3, and I'd like to ask if any governors have any comments on the consent agenda.
I'd like to move to table the vote on Smith-Munt.
Do we need to have discussion on that? Do you have questions?
It's up to the chair. You can have a discussion, or you can just someone can second the motion, have a vote.
Okay, well, I'll second the motion, if there are questions about why the seconding. Sure.
Oh, sure. This was a review of the Smith-Munt guidelines, the framework, and I know our legal team wanted to continue to connect with the team at USAGM to make sure that we're squared away in all the language, and so just would like further discussion around it before we vote.
Okay, is any other questions or concerns? Okay, so I will.
Is it? So then you can put
communication between
perfect
Council at State and USAGM. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay. The ayes have it. Thank you. And the rest of the consent agenda, I guess we should move for the adoption of the rest of the consent agenda. Is there a second on that? Okay, Governor Kempner, all in favor, say aye. Aye. No objections? Okay, we are there. Now we turn to the public comment section of the board. The board permits members of the public who register to attend our open meetings the opportunity to speak for up to 3 minutes. Actually, one person registered, but they are not here, so sad to say there is no public comment. Members of the public are most definitely welcome and encourage you to come and make public comments at our next board meeting. And without any further ado, now it is time for the CEO and Director's report, and I'd like to ask CEO and Director John Lansing to give a brief report on agency operations since our last board meeting. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Governors. Two quick personnel things. I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Steve Kappas. Steve is former president of NBC News. Prior to that, a producer and a senior executive for CBS News. And I've had the opportunity to bring Steve on as a senior advisor and consultant to work with us, particularly on our next 5-year strategic plan. And I thought I'd give Steve a minute just to say hello.
Thank you, John, and to members of the board, good morning. I'm thrilled to be here. I've spent the last 2 weeks getting to understand the operations. It's a complex organization, as you can imagine. John asked me to give first impressions, and I will say we've had 2 days of management retreat to report out the caliber of the people who are these networks and this agency all around the world is first rate, and it's world class. Deeply impressed with what everybody's up to. The changes that John had brought to the agency, and especially in adherence to original reporting, independent reporting, accurate reporting, are all things grounded in outstanding journalism, standards, policies, and all those things are things that I deeply believe in, and I think that in this era, especially all over the world, support of journalism and outstanding quality work is absolutely vital, and we're just thrilled to have a chance to help.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. We're glad you're here. I also would like to introduce all of you to Ms. Daisy Sindelar, who was appointed on December 7th, 2018, with your support, thank you, as Vice President and Acting President of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Daisy joined RFERL in 2001 and has extensive knowledge of RFERL's programming and operations. She was the director of Current Time, as you know, the 24/7 Russian language global network, and in cooperation with Voice of America, and played an integral part in launching and growing this flagship project. Daisy speaks fluent Russian and is a veteran of Russian reporting within Russia earlier in her career. This is Daisy's first board meeting, and you'll be hearing from her later in our ICC highlights. But before we get to the highlights later, I thought I'd give Daisy a chance just to say hello.
Thank you very much. Thanks, John, and good morning to everybody. And it's really a pleasure to be here today. Obviously, I've been with RFE for a long time, but this is a new side of the relationship with USAGM for me. So I've really been grateful to John for giving me the opportunity. It's a pleasure and a real honor for me to have an opportunity to serve the company that I've worked with so long. And for those of you on the board that I've had a chance to talk to already, thank you very much for reaching out, and I look forward to meeting more of you in the future. And you mentioned it was the 6th that I was appointed, so it's almost my 3-month anniversary, so I think I've got it all figured out.
Thank you, Daisy. You're doing a great job. Now to move towards the ICC highlights, the U.S. Agency for Global Media fosters and sustains free and democratic societies by exemplifying and supporting free media. The USAGM's 5 networks pursue this mission through their own engaging content on television, radio, internet, social and mobile platforms, and also by working closely with local media partners around the world that bring our content into those markets, establishing valuable connections to critical institutions that support civil societies and democratic communities. The 5 networks also advance U.S. national interest by providing audiences in closed societies or where free media is not yet fully established with consistently accurate, compelling, professional, and independent journalism. And I underscore independent to underscore the independence of this agency from any government interference. The U.S. International Coordinating Committee, also known as the ICC, is made up of the heads of the 5 USAGM networks. And before I invite each of the ICC to give a brief report, I'd like to highlight some recent key events. Yesterday, we did a soft launch, or actually the hard launch, I should say, of VOA 365, a new global network, 24/7 in Farsi, providing news and information directly to Iranian audiences within Iran and also to Farsi speakers around the world. Similar to current time, it's now our second global language network. VOA 365 is led by the Voice of America in collaboration with Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. It's fresh, new, and engaging Persian language programming that will speak to Iran's young, diverse audiences in Iran and, as I said, around the world. Yesterday, we showcased it on Capitol Hill, and we'll have other launch events around the country coming up in the next several weeks. Now, turning to the Soros issue at OCB, on February 27th, I issued a statement on the Office of Cuba Broadcasting's anti-Semitic video segment about George Soros that was deeply offensive and wholly inconsistent with our professional standards and ethics. Based on a recent comprehensive human resources investigation of the incident, 1 employee and 3 contractors were terminated, and the agency has initiated the disciplinary process for 4 additional OCB employees related to the incident. In addition, I've ordered a review of all OCB content going back several months to further strengthen programming and identify and address any patterns that may exist of other unethical, unprofessional, biased, or substandard journalism at OCB. And I'll report back to you when that review is completed. It's being done by 5 academics at an arm's length distance from the agency, 5 academic experts that are reviewing that content. To that end, USAGM commissioned a team of those experts to conduct the review, and a final report will be expected in 3 months and will be made public. Now back to the ICC for their programming highlights. Voice of America Director Amanda Bennett is here to tell you about a new show called Our Voices, which was launched in early December. Half-an-hour English TV program focused on African women throughout the continent and around the world. Amanda will also highlight VOA's comprehensive and, I would say, excellent coverage of the uprising in Venezuela. So, Amanda?
Thank you very much, John. I'll start with Venezuela because it's very much in the news right now. VOA has 4 stringers on the ground, both in Venezuela itself, very brave stringers who are working there, and also in Colombia, 1 at the border, looking at the humanitarian aid, and 1 in Bogota. Covering this leadership challenge, which I think has really captured the world. And you can see this because, first off, we are covering this for our entire network of affiliates throughout South and Latin America, but also we're seeing that there is a very significant global interest in this. It's not surprising that the whole world is watching this. Our digital engagement, for example, Instagram has gone up 100% just in the last 2 weeks, and Twitter, 53%, video engagement, 86%. But what we're finding quite dramatic is that there is a noticeable spike in interest in this topic in China and in Iran. And I think we ought to pause and think about what that means and what the value of the transmission of this information is to these otherwise closed societies. Now I'd like to just show you a brief video of the show that we call Our Voices that was launched in January.
I'm Ann Bior, and joining us from Kinshasa is Anastasia Tudiesh, VOA's special correspondent. Hello there. 3 words for us.
I would start with disbelief.
And let's not forget, this is the first time that they're using electronic voting machines.
It is the biggest public works project ever in Kenya on the country's economic future.
African first ladies don't always work in the spotlight. Aisha Buhari, the Nigeria's first lady, so she publicly criticized her husband in an interview, his leadership style.
She's a young South African who, at the age of 13, became a symbol of the fight against what she saw as her school's racist hair policy.
I was once a refugee. My family, who's around me right now, still still lives in Kakuma, unable to go back to South Sudan because of conflict and instability.
We're in the U.S. state of Alabama. 18 young women from South Africa and America are about to go on the road trip of a lifetime and relive the moments of tragedy and triumph that redefined this nation.
Had I not been blind, I would have been early married, like at the age of 10 or 12. So I always called that being blind was my emancipator. That way it gave me the path to education and brought me to where I am today.
I had a great experience of here in the U.S. to going to HBCU, a historically black college. So it's when I really begin to appreciate my Africanness, you know?
Africanness.
My Africanness, you know?
News, information, and current events brought to you by African women for Africa.
So just to look at this is a news and information and current events show hosted by women, but is dealing with topics of importance all over Africa. As you can see, we've had topics having to do with energy, the DRC elections, women in politics, legislation for the disabled, and a particularly fascinating one that you saw a little clip from about the black experience in Africa and in the United States, where they contrasted their experiences in both places. And I think you'd also find the really just an amazingly heartbreaking, heartwarming experience as you saw Ayan Bior going back to the Kakuma refugee camp where she lived until the age of 7 and meeting back her family there, and her saying that I can report on this because this is me. And she grew up in Texas, actually, after that. There's 4 hosts from South Sudan, from South Africa, from Burundi, Nigeria, and Eritrea as a backup. And we have to say that it's been launched in January, and so far it's been one of our fastest adoption in at least the history that I know of at Voice of America. It's been taken up by 30 affiliates. I'm trying to get the exact station number because a lot of these affiliates own multiple stations. We think it's up to 100 stations in just a couple of weeks. So this has been something that there clearly feels to be a need of, and it's broadcast in 11 different countries at this point. So this is something that is clearly filling a need in Africa and is being taken up quite quickly, and I'm extremely, extremely excited about it. And I'm going to take one little bonus thing because I just got an email today. I may have talked to you a bit about our intent to focus on refugee camps, and the effort that we started just 8 months ago. On March 31st, we're sending a delegation to the Rohingya camp in Cox's Bazar. In partnership with UNHCR, we're going to be training 100 English language teachers who in turn will train another 1,000 English language teachers. We've completely recast our teaching English curriculum, and we see this as a revitalization of something that formed the emotional and physical core of Voice of America back 75 years ago in bringing the English language into refugee camps and presenting a future for a lot of people here that would otherwise have no future. So thank you very much for letting me have that little extra piece.
It's quite all right. Governors, any questions, comments? All right, then we'll move to Tomas Regalado with an update on the work at OCB, particularly around the 60th year of the regime in Cuba, and he'll touch as well on their coverage of Venezuela along the Venezuela-Colombia border. Tomas?
Thank you very much, John. And first, I'd like to thank you and the Human Resource Department for the thorough investigation that was done and the results that you mentioned, and the commitment of this agency and OCB to do what we need to do, to focus on the mission and be absolutely professional. We are now in the process of getting a new editor. I'd like to introduce the Deputy Director of OCB, Emilio Vasquez, and the new News Director, George Jauregui. And we have a good team. As a matter of fact, when I got there, the first thing I did was to create a division that never existed, which was the Investigative and Research and Historical Division. As a result of that, We were able to produce 10 one-hour shows for TV and 35 one-hour shows for radio about the 60 years of the Castro regime. You will see this plus the new set of programming. Since my last report to the board, we have created 6 new TV shows and 5 new radio shows. So if we can see the video.
Es un honor para mí el estar hoy entre un grupo de los hombres más valientes del mundo. Me siento orgullosa que mi hijo haya conocido a sus oficiales. Es aún demasiado joven para darse cuenta de lo que ha ocurrido aquí, pero yo me ocuparé de contarle la historia de vuestra Valencia.
¿Dónde está mi hijo? Que quiero ver a mi hijo. Dice, bueno, su hijo hace 3 días que ha muerto.
Desde el principio nos hemos unido en una lucha constante.
Bienvenidos a esta programación especial de Radio y Televisión Martí.
A mis espaldas, el puente Las Tienditas. Y ven como el régimen de Nicolás Maduro ha usado contenedores y un tanque de gas cisterno para prohibir la entrada de la ayuda humanitaria para el pueblo de Venezuela.
Como parte de la ayuda se encuentran estos kits médicos. Estos kits pudieran ayudar a más de 10.000 personas por 90 días.
Sean bienvenidos a En Profundidad, un programa de televisión martí.
Te quiero de bueno, mi queridísimo Javier.
Para que eviten que más personas sigan muriendo.
¡Nicaragua va a ser libre!
Esta es la realidad de la Cuba contemporánea y se llama apartheid, no democracia de partido único.
Lo que está quedando aquí es el último round del castrismo este.
En poesía, en estilo.
Hola amigos de Cuba y el mundo, yo soy Karen Caballero. Les saludo y agradezco muchísimo su compañía.
Hoy tenemos un programa lleno de música.
Para resolver el problema en el hemisferio, enfocarse en resolver el problema en Cuba.
Cuando una persona está bien informada, es capaz de discutir cualquier tema con mucho más profundidad.
If you ask me what is the greatest aspiration of any Cuban exile, my answer will be we would like to provide the Cubans in the island with the same opportunity that this great country has provided us with. That's what we want for Cuba.
On the Venezuela issue, it's interesting, and I'm following Amanda's way of expressing the impact of the Venezuela coverage. We have a spike of hits in our digital of about 300% from Cuba. There are about 55,000 Cubans in Venezuela, according to the government, the Cuban government, only 25,000, but still, if you multiply that for the relatives and friends, there is a huge interest. The Cuban national press has not been reporting anything on Venezuela, so we are the only source of Venezuela. Nicaragua, our correspondent has been harassed, and there were shot fires at his home, and he is under threat of being killed. So Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela are part of the daily coverage of OCB. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Tomas. Governors, any questions, comments? All right, Daisy, we'll go over to you. You have to pull the mic pretty close to you.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much. And John was kind enough to give me a little bit of extra time, is that right? Since I'm a newbie, so I'll try not to go on too long. Someone can play a violin or something if it goes on past the normal amount. I wanted to start with a couple of notes up front. First of all, I do want to introduce Mehdi Parmpachi, who is the new head of Radio Free Europe's Persian language service, Radio Farda. And Mehdi is a real seasoned television professional who came to us from BBC's Persian service, and he's brought a real breath of fresh air to Radio Farda and to our collaboration with VOA on VOA 365. I'm going to cough for one. Okay. Also, some serious news, and Ken, thank you for calling attention to the work of the dangerous work of the journalists in the field and the consequences of that. We got some kind of alarming news about our crew for our investigative program in Ukraine schemes today, because a journalist and a cameraman were in the field doing a piece about illegal land appropriation, and they were attacked by some local council people outside of Kiev, and the cameraman's, camera was broken and he suffered a concussion. So they have filed a complaint, and hopefully he will be on the mend soon. So there are a couple new things going on at RFE that we're really excited about that I want to give you an opportunity to hear about. And the first is our recent return to two countries where we had pretty much considered our work done, and that's Bulgaria and Romania. So we reopened our services there in January after closing our services more than a decade ago when those countries entered the EU and NATO. Since then, we've seen a pretty alarming trend of shrinking media space and a real consolidation of media ownership. If you take just Bulgaria as an example, 90% of media content coming out of that country is coming from a single city, the capital, Sofia, and the top 5 media outlets there are controlled by a single person. So you can just imagine some of the ills that come with that. And that's a pretty depressing scenario that's playing out across all of Eastern Europe. So let's take a quick look at part of a promo for the Bulgarian service.
Свободата е надежда. Свободата е усилие. Свободата е кауза. Свободата е познание. Свободата е отговорност. Свободата се защитава всеки ден. Свободна Европа. Новините на свободните хора.
Basically, the promo is speaking to many generations of Bulgarians and reminding them that freedom is a cause, it's a responsibility, and it's something that needs to be protected every day. And I don't know how good everyone's Bulgarian is, but I want to call your attention to our logo because it's a real departure for Radio Free Europe, because it says only Free Europe. We took the radio out of the logo for the first time. And this was at the suggestion of our Bulgarian broadcasters, because not broadcasters, our Bulgarian service, because this is a digital-only service that is targeting a younger audience that has no institutional memory of our radio legacy. So we thought it was a bold move. We like the logo a lot. It's been customized for Bulgarian Cyrillic, so it has a special look. And it's an interesting option for those of us at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, as we consider what to do with our very long name going forward into the future. So another interesting development for us has been our move to a new bureau in Kiev, and we'll show a very short clip from there as well.
Вітаю вас, дорогі наші.
Це новий проект від Радіо Свобода.
Ніяких студій, ніяких декорацій, справжній ньюзрум. Цю програму ми так і назвали «Ньюзрум».
So this new bureau is a real quantum leap forward for us in terms of our TV production capabilities inside Ukraine. We have a large hard set. We have several balcony locations. We have a programmable video wall. We have a customized set for schemes. And as you've seen from that short glimpse, we're looking at the bureau as a set in and of itself. So we have a new show called Newsroom that's been launched by the Ukrainian service that sort of sets the anchors free to walk around the bureau and interview various journalists about the pressing issues of the day. So that's one of those things, a program that we developed ahead of a really critical election year in Ukraine. We have presidential elections at the end of the month, parliamentary and local elections at the end of the year. And so the new bureau is really a great opportunity for the Ukrainian service and Current Time to beef up their programming in Ukraine ahead of the elections. And so we are looking at having a lot of live programming in and around Election Day that will be feeding not only the Ukrainian service and Current Time, but also our Russian, Georgian, Armenian, and Belarusian services, and VOA potentially as well. So this has been a long time in the making. We're really happy to be in this bureau, and I think with this, Kyiv really joins Bishkek and Yerevan for us in terms of real bureau powerhouses. It's worth mentioning that this is a year where we're looking with real concern at two other bureaus of ours. The first one is in Kabul, where the potential for U.S. troop withdrawal and a government power sharing agreement with the Taliban obviously throws some of our operational capabilities in question in the future. And the second is Moscow, where we're operating under intensifying pressure because of our status as a foreign agent. So I want to stick with Russia for a second and talk a little bit about the phenomenal success that we've had over the past year in terms of bringing two distinct but definitely interconnected platforms to the fore, and one is live news and the other is digital programming. So Current Time Current Time is the Russian language network that is led by RFE in cooperation with VOA, and over the past year has dramatically increased the amount of live news programming that it is providing its audience. That's in part because we have boosted our live studio shows, particularly from VOA, and because we've really worked hard to bolster our field capabilities inside Russia. So in the past year alone, we had, not only in Russia, in the region, so we had the Putin-Trump summit in Helsinki live. We covered the World Cup in Russia from all 11 host cities live. More recently, we had coverage of the sort of horrifying apartment collapse in Magnitogorsk live. And last year on Election Day in Russia, we went live for 16 hours. It's really quite phenomenal when you think about the fact that we were a foreign agent and we were able to provide 16 hours of live programming on the air. So we think that our presence on the ground inside Russia is critical and really paying dividends. Live news is a credibility builder anywhere in the world where people are used to being fed a steady, carefully crafted narrative, and it's particularly important when you're able to show with your live images something that your audience is definitely not seeing anywhere else. So with that in mind, I want to show you one more clip that comes from one of the series of protests that we saw in Russia in recent months related to the government's proposal to raise the retirement age. These protests have been it's been a highly resonant political event inside Russia, and it's particularly interesting because for the first time it's really drawing together a diverse swaths of the Russian population. It's not just young opposition members, it's literally everyone. And so what we've learned from our coverage too is that we want to get not out of Moscow, beyond Moscow to the degree possible. Moscow is obviously very important, but it's where the focus of the vast majority of the media is always going to be, and what that means by extension is that the police are likely to exercise restraint. The real story is taking place deeper inside Russia, where hundreds, if not thousands, of protesters are being forcibly arrested during these protests. So the clip that we're going to show you is not terribly deep inside Russia. It's St. Petersburg, but I wanted to show it to you because it captures a really shocking moment in live television where you're seeing an elderly protester forcibly arrested and treated quite roughly by police as he's surrounded by younger protesters who are clearly quite distressed by what's going on. So let's take a look.
Как вы себя чувствуете? Меня зовут Стерник Юрий Львович. Что с вами случилось? Что с вами случилось? Я стоял в одиночном пикете. Меня вот подошел Денисов, прапорщик, да, и арестовал незаконно, хотя я стоял в одиночном пикете и никому не мешал.
Что было на вашем плакате? Что было на вашем плакате?
На моем плакате было вот такая жопа в стране из-за пенсионеров.
Смотрите, его пытаются забрать. И, видимо, теперь заберут и молодого человека, который пытался забрать этого дедушку.
So we kept that clip short for the sake of brevity, but the live coverage continued, and we stayed with that elderly gentleman, and he actually ended up collapsing. He was clearly quite stressed from the treatment that he was subjected to, and the crowd kind of rallied around him and tried to help him while the police were standing idly by, not clearing the street for an ambulance and really not doing much in the way of supporting him or helping him. And so all of that was playing out on live television, so it's already getting tremendous impact from the audience who's watching it in the moment. But here's where the digital element comes in. Our digital editors on that day took the live footage and immediately turned it around into a short social video to put it back out onto social platforms. And so that video got close to 1 million views on the day of the protests. And the really important thing about that is that the vast majority of that 1 million was inside Russia. So it's getting to the audience that really needs to see those images the most. And so to me, this clip is a perfect illustration of how live news and digital strategy work together perfectly to maximize impact. And so I guess I will just conclude by saying our next big challenge is making sure that we can maintain that impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Daisy. Governors, questions, comments? Thank you very much. So we're going to move over to Libby, and she's going to discuss a project she's undertaken through her Mandarin service at Radio Free Asia. Libby?
China is experiencing its first economic downturn in nearly 30 years. This means many Chinese are experiencing a decline in their living standards for the first time in their lives, and it's shaken them. Car sales fell by 16% in January, marking the 7th straight month of decline. The numbers of unsold houses sits at the highest in 2 years. Companies from lenders to property developers to ride-hailing services and online shopping are having massive layoffs. There's an increasing consensus in the private sector that Xi Jinping is mismanaging the economy, which has sparked an uptick in discontent under his leadership. The People's Daily, a CCP newspaper, warned in a front-page article in 2017 that regulators need to enhance the sense of urgency and prevent and resolve financial crises such as black swans and gray rhinos, all kinds of risk signs that cannot be taken lightly. For those of you who are not economists, a gray rhino is a highly likely, high-impact threat that's being ignored. A gray swan, a black swan, is one that you can't predict, so really there's not much there. With first-hand footage and interviews from 6 cities in China, the Rhino series, first 4 episodes, examined China's bad debt in the banking and financial services, local government, the real estate bubble, and state-owned enterprises' systemic issues. They targeted the most pressing economic worries in China that have somehow received hardly any in-depth analysis that could be understood by normal people. Chinese experts have correlated the PRC's recent push to achieve complete societal control through the social credit system, the mass surveillance of its citizens, the expansion of paramilitary officers to enforce state values, and the brutal actions to subdue and silence independent voices and minority populations, as creating what is being called a disciplinary state. The disciplinary state is one in which the party has the power to pull everybody into line, and precisely in the face of something like this, a domestic disruption that the economic downturn is threatening the Chinese. The party is hypersensitive to any domestic issues which could control this spark for change. It has 1.4 billion people to control. Immediately after our video, which I'm going to show you a clip from, was released, coincidentally, Xi Jinping warned that China must be on guard against the gray rhino events, and followed a release of data showing the economy's slowest growth in 28 years. We're going to go to the clip, but I wanted to, in case you're wondering what the Chinese people get, I printed some color headlines of the stories that are being, from the state-run media. Economists upbeat on the country's 2019 growth. Over $1 trillion raised on Chinese capital markets. Government to further boost advanced manufacturing, innovation, and competitiveness. And China's February inflation rate expected to be moderate. So you can imagine the reception of these videos inside the country, which was dramatic. We got an avalanche of experts and economists and actually citizens who never, ever saw anything what we did now. So I'm going to show you a clip because our job is to make sure the inside Chinese get to see information relevant to their lives.
如果就只是这点钱呢，其实我这身体我真的扛不住。这个钱拿回来可能性很小。
这个其实只是一次小跌，就接下去它可能会有一次大跌。
债务来自于企业部分，大概由国企造成的呢，有将近80%。
就是没破产时的，上百个人都去，现在破产的蛮多。
中国特色的民事机时刻已经爆发了。
So as you look at these headlines that are being, propagated in every state-controlled media outlet in China, you can imagine how shocking, these images and stories are. So, anyone have any questions? We've talked in the past about the social contract. We always wonder why it is that, Chinese citizens accept what is being done in their country, and because it's this very pervasive social contract that the government's side of that contract is to provide economic comfort, rising living standards, and quality of life. We've seen a lot of things show that they're unable to do that, including the counterfeit viruses, the substandard construction, all kinds of capital flight and corruption. This is integral to the security that the Chinese government feels because of its economy and its power to leverage around the world. I'm sorry, I'll stop talking about China.
Sure.
Now, as the economy is slowing down, Xi appears to be taking a page from Putin's book, which is starting to shift the basis of legitimacy from economic growth to patriotic mobilization. Do you also have materials that you broadcast to China about, essentially Chinese foreign policy growing from assertive to aggressive, South China Sea, islands, and so on and so forth?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I think this is even heavier censored than economic news.
It is. It's a little bit tricky when you start talking about the Chinese behavior globally, which all of us have, a perspective on. Because remember, inside the country, they're spinning that as a positive. Exactly. Right. So we are constantly trying to counter that with the reality. Yeah. But we do a lot of reporting about, Chinese behavior everywhere. Even, in Africa, the conflicts that, the giant diaspora Chinese populations drop there has caused. It's a very serious problem. We're going to have a lot of interesting events coming forward. Yes, and particularly because in the Philippines there's kind of a split, right, between the military and the government about the threat of China.
Libby, do we have any statistics about how many people actually see this?
We did take a look when we put the video together, and I believe it was 300,000 in the first 6 weeks. Yes, 300,000. Just on YouTube. So, we have a hard time counting sometimes because of the circumvention.
Yeah, I hope this doesn't sound too philosophical, but I'm just wondering, about how you balance modeling independent media versus the downside risk of coming across as rooting for failure of the government. You know what I mean? Like when you're talking about all these risks to the economy and you're trying to raise the veil and show people what's really going on, how do you think about balancing or trying to provide independent media versus we have an anti-government perspective, or we're pushing a point of view that's rooting against the success of the government? Because I'm sure there's a sensitivity in country to that.
Yeah, we don't push values or judgments. We provide the facts and the evidence for the audience to make their own decisions. This is, in China, a battle of information that will go into people's decision-making. Our mission is to put news and information in the market that is being censored or misrepresented by the state government. The ship has sailed a long time ago on how RFA is characterized inside the country, because the nature of doing the news that the Chinese government doesn't want to get out obviously slings the other way. But when we talk about the economy and the issues that caused these crises, we present, other nations' positive actions when they have had these situations, as they've faced debt. What have they done? Have they done economic investment surge? The last time China went through a crisis, it put a massive amount of money into infrastructure domestically. They can't do that now because of One Belt, One Road. So we tried to give ideas and perspectives and demonstrate, what democratic or representative governments have done in the case of trying to take care of their people during economic downturns. It's an example. I don't remember if there's in there because, but we do in our regular reporting. We definitely do that. Yeah, sure.
Libby, one more question. The firewall is still there, right, for the internet? So is it mostly news? Is it mostly radio, or how do you break through on the
Well, it's a very interesting question. The censorship, the online censorship in China has markedly gotten much worse with their control of VPNs. But we still have, an enormous amount of people, netizens, who are participating on censored social media platforms, and then we have proxies, information nodes that spread our news out internally on, internal platforms. But if you think about it, there are nearly 3 million Facebook users, right, in China, and there's no Facebook. So there are ways that they're getting around it, and the news spreads because we keep getting feedback from inside China, so we know that it's being spread there. And then, you know, Xi Jinping makes a coincidental speech right after, so.
Anybody else?
No, I just want to applaud you, Libby, and everyone else, I think, in making the case for free and open societies, highlighting this discontent and repressive societies. And it was what Amanda said about the Venezuela case being followed so closely in China and Iran, that we look at the Russians, we look at the Chinese, we look at the Iranians, we look at the Venezuelans. These are people who have formed a kind of implicit alliance against freedom, against free expression, against and have tried to both reshape the internet, reshape expression, reshape the media landscape. So it's Cuba as well, of course, goes without saying. They pioneered it in some sense. And so all the work that the networks are doing, I just want to really applaud everyone. It's important. It's also important from, I think, a U.S. government foreign policy standpoint as well, that we get this information out to these societies.
Okay, we have one more, and you recall we had a board meeting. Michelle wasn't with us back in the fall out at MBN, and they were getting ready to relaunch the network under Alberto's leadership, and that relaunch has gone extremely well, and I couldn't be more proud of the work coming out of MBN now, and for one reason. It's not just because it is better storytelling and better journalism and looks better on TV, although those are really important. It's because for the first time they really are relevant in the region. And that's because of Alberto's leadership. So, Alberto, over to you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, governors. We're now 4 months into the relaunch of Al Hurra Television and MBN Digital, and began on November 4th, 2018. And we've seen tremendously positive reaction. Of course, this is a time when we went from a massive expansion in television news from 4 hours a day to more than 12 hours a day. And we've sought to, especially with that expansion, to erase as much as possible the divide, the silo that exists between broadcast and digital crossover. We wanted to highlight in our video some of these crossover stories that have generated tremendous numbers we haven't seen before since the relaunch, both in terms of general interest and numbers and discussion. These include the exclusive for Pan-Arab television networks interview we had with Secretary of State Pompeo in February after the Warsaw Summit on Iran. An interview with a Moroccan woman refugee fled from ISIS, which had over 5.4 million views. And a story about Muslims re-erecting a cross on a church in Mosul after the liberation of Mosul from ISIS, with also over 4 million views. And other stories, all other multi-million viewer stories, including that of a wide net cast, including that of the first Muslim to be elected to the Alexandria, Virginia City Council, to a mini documentary on Sudan on who is killing the protesters in Sudan, a story about Sudanese death squads, which is what led to the harassment and the pulling of the credentials of our correspondent in Khartoum, and exclusive footage of the Saudi refugee, Rahaf, who went to Canada, and related stories. So let's go to the video. it. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions, comments? Alberto, thank you very much. I'll wrap up by just discussing with you that now that we've launched our VOA 365, our Farsi Global Digital Network, we're turning our attention with Libby and with Amanda to drive a new 24/7 global Mandarin network around the world. We view the rising influence of China around the world as probably the #1 foreign policy issue facing the United States right now. It has a lot of competition, but I think it's probably the most underreported story, and I think our efforts now, since we're gaining new muscle memory on developing these global 24/7 networks, and we have the Russian network, we have the Farsi network, and up next, and hopefully at the next board meeting, we'll be able to show you the beginning stages of a Mandarin worldwide digital network. And with that, Mr. Chairman, back to you.
Well, thank you, Mr. CEO and Director. Look, I think all of us feel this way as governors when we come in. It is extraordinarily inspiring to see the incredible work that is going on here and the transformation of these networks, the way that they are working together, to see the high-quality work that's being produced, the impact it's having. This is an unbelievably turbulent time in world affairs, and it's a time like this that the agency is needed more than ever. And I just want to, on behalf of my colleagues on the board, just applaud everyone at the agency for the teamwork, the hard work that has gone into the transformation of this agency, and also to recognize the hard work that people put in during the government shutdown when people had to make immense personal sacrifices in order to get to work and to feed their families. And I know all of us and consultants working without being paid and the like, all of us really appreciate the immense sacrifice. And on behalf of the board, we really salute all of you around the table for the professionalism, the hard work, the dedication, day in, day out. So
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great. And with that, let me open it up to other governors if they wish to comment on what we've seen. Or
again, I just want to echo your comments. And I've said this before, but each meeting, board meeting, it seems to get even better. So, so one of the great rewards of doing really well is having to do better. But so far, every meeting seems to accomplish that goal. So the work is very impressive, and the impact it's having is truly important, given what's happening in the world.
Thank you.
Other governors' comments, thoughts? Ambassador Kornbluth.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the work of the government shutdown, and thank you all for your professionalism throughout that, and for what you do every day and the sacrifices you make, but especially when you're not getting paid to do it. It's thank you for bringing that up, Ken, and thank you to everybody who worked through that.
The sacrifices of this agency are big and small. They go from, as we saw, they go from death to the challenge people face during the shutdown, which is a challenge. They go to life threats. They go to our Uyghur journalists having their families locked up and still not getting information from them in these horrific camps in China. And so it's, I think all of us as governors take our duty very seriously, and we could not be more proud of the work that's being done here by the team. So, other comments? Okay. There being none, let me note that the next board meeting will be held here at USAGM headquarters on June 5th, 2019. I'll work closely with my fellow governors and CEO Lansing to develop the agenda for this meeting. I encourage all governors to give me, CEO Lansing, or staff input on topics that you'd like to see addressed at the next meeting. Do any governors wish to move to adjourn the meeting? Governor Aaron, is there a second? Governor Kempner, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Great. This concludes the formal meeting of the USAGM Board of Governors. I want to thank everyone for a terrific meeting.